Anthony Powell is curator of Buffalo Soldiers, the largest exhibit of African-American soldiers in the country. As keeper of this history, Anthony tells us how this collection came together.
I was able to pull most of this together since I was fortunate enough to be raised by my grandfather, who lived to be 105, who was a Buffalo soldier for 40 years, from the 1880s to the 1920s. And so fortunately, all of the artifacts were at home, were around me all of my life. And with interviewing other contemporaries of my grandfather, I was able to put together probably the largest collection of memorabilia on the Buffalo Soldiers in the country. And I know for a fact my photo collection of my grandfather's is the largest in the country, far exceeding the National Archives or the Smithsonian. As a matter of fact, when the Smithsonian did their exhibit on the Buffalo Soldiers, I loaned them their images.
And tell us a little bit about how the Buffalo Soldiers came about, actually.
Well, the Buffalo Soldiers came about after the Civil War. They were units that were created by the Congress in 1866 as regular Army units. And these soldiers would ironically be used to fight against Native Americans in the West. But their story went beyond that. They served in the Spanish-American War. They served in the Philippines, Mexico, World War I, and the regiments and the units continued in existence through World War II. Well, one of the things that we were able to do was to have museums and universities that appreciated that this was a forgotten part of American history. And we've had some of the best venues in the country for this exhibit. My lectures have been at Yale University and at other top universities. And what we try to do is to share with people a part of American history that they don't know of. My grandfather's generation of soldiers were Americans, and they were not ashamed of being Americans. And this particular exhibit highlights the fact that they were dignified, honorable men who were not ashamed of being colored Americans. And when people go through the exhibit and they look at the photographs that my grandfather took, that is what they see. If you look into the eyes of the men and they talk to you and say, hey, I'm a man, and I'm proud to be what I am. When you watch movies today as yesterday, we see John Wayne riding to the rescue, of settlers and all of that. The reality of the West was that 1 in 5 soldiers was black. And the men who rode to the rescue of settlers were 85% of the time black men. Of the battles fought against Native Americans, ironically and unfortunately, 85% involved black soldiers, not John Wayne. But yet there's not one occurrence of a massacre or indiscriminate killing of Native women or children by black soldiers, not one. They got their name Buffalo Soldiers not because of the kinky hair and the black skin. That's folklore. It's not true. But Native Americans gave them that name because of the fact that even though they fought them as warriors, they treated them with dignity and respect. And so just as the buffalo was a sacred animal to Native Americans, they wouldn't give their sacred name just to an oppressor. And black soldiers, unfortunately, were used to oppress Native people, putting them on the reservations. So it had to be a reason why they were given that name. And that reason dealt with the sacredness of the buffalo, and that was their treatment of Native American people. And it's not saying that they did not kill them, because they did as warriors, but they did things in a manly fashion. Okay? And yeah, inhonorable. And I think that separated them, there's no thing. It did separate them from the others, that were indiscriminately killing Native people.
And from talking with your grandfather and some of his comrades and things of that nature, how did they feel about having to take on the responsibility of fighting another group of oppressed people, which were the American Indians? I mean, you have two so-called brown or black peoples fighting one another. African Americans just came out of slavery at some point, and so you have that thing. How did they feel about doing that?
Well, most of the soldiers during the Indian Wars, unfortunately, they did their duty. Okay, they were used to put the Indians on the reservations. I guess how they did it speaks for itself. Being that they did not oppress them as whites did. That is not to justify the fact that they were used, as oppressors. They didn't evolve into men of conscience until the Spanish-American War. And it was during the Spanish-American War, for the first time, black soldiers questioned, why am I here? And they did that because in the Philippines, they were confronted with overt American racism. The Filipinos were called the niggas and the little black monkeys and the gucas. Okay, and they did all of this in front of black soldiers thinking, oh, it's okay. We don't mean you niggas here. We're talking about these little island niggas. And they did this in thinking that black soldiers were just going to acquiesce, but they didn't. Okay, for the first time in their history, they did something that they had never done before. They deserted. Okay, they didn't desert and go back to America. They deserted and joined the Filipino quest for liberty. 12 of those men became officers in the Philippine Army. Now, they lost the war and they lost their lives, all right? But the key issue was they became men of conscience, and they fought for a principle that's supposed to be American, and that principle is liberty and freedom.
They also did they also fight in the Cuban campaign?
Yes,
And so how do you think they, because when you go to Cuba, you have people, black people just as well, so.
During the Spanish-American War, during the Cuban campaign, I mean, the premise of the war was to free Cuba's oppressed people from Spanish tyranny. And so black soldiers participated into this willingly. Hey, we're freeing these Afro-Cubans, from the tyranny of Spain. Okay, so wholeheartedly they did that. But it was in the Philippines that overt American racism cropped up. And that's when they questioned, this is wrong. I shouldn't be here.
So what part does, right now, today, does the American Army, how do they honor the Buffalo Soldiers, or what type of just due or respect do they give to the Buffalo Soldiers and that?
Well, the Army over the last couple of years have been doing things to, recognize the quality of the units that served. In Kansas, they have the Buffalo Soldier Monument, and there have been a few other things of a recognition aspect of these soldiers. But that's about it. That's about it.
And so your goal with this exhibit is to further educate peoples of the world about the contributions of the Buffalo Soldiers?
Absolutely. My goal is that people should understand that this aspect of American history is a valid part of American history. And I use that phrase again. Black, white, Native American, or whatever, it's our history, American history. And our ancestors built this country, and so we must get the recognition that we deserve. And this exhibit does that by sharing with people the images that my grandfather captured of his generation of soldiers. And so when a person goes through this exhibit, whether they be white, black, or whatever, they're going to leave with, God, I didn't know that these were handsome, dignified, honorable men. And that is what we try to do with the exhibit. And so no matter where we went, we've got positive responses from all people about the exhibit.